Hey everybody, I'm Billy Norden. I'm the Retirement and Financial Education Coordinator for the RCA Board of Benefit Services.
Hi everyone, I'm Anna Radcliffe. I'm the Director of Future Church Innovation for the RCA.
So this is called Jumpstart, where we're here to help you and your congregation get unstuck, wherever you might be feeling stuck.
Throughout this video series, we'll offer stories, personal stories, and congregational stories of leaders who have gotten stuck and how they've gotten unstuck. We'll offer you research and data about current opportunities and current ways in which people are getting unstuck, and we have some grant opportunities to offer you. This is Jumpstart. Today we're talking about getting unstuck.
Ooh, the hardest one.
The absolute
Maybe.
worst. Yeah, the absolute worst. The absolute worst. Yep. So we've talked a little bit about a couple different things. We talked about renovations, which is a learning process for congregations. Mm-hmm. We've talked about, you've mentioned Ritter Church Renewal, which is also, that was something you did that was really valuable. And that is a collective learning process. I thought it would be helpful as we just talk through this idea of getting unstuck to start from the place of what is communal collaborative learning? Like, what is it? Do you want to explain it a little bit from your vantage point? You were a pastor leading a church through a change process. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience entails?
I can talk a little bit about it, right? We're talking about a big thing that's always changing, but I think the key is in the name, right? We come together to learn because we're only going to be able to see a certain slice of the pie from our vantage point, from our personal experience, and from the way that we engage the world like with ourselves. But somebody else is going to bring something different and a little bit of a different vision. And the more of those thoughtful people you have around the table, the more you can start to see the whole. And the whole is where God plays, right? Yeah. The whole is where the Spirit plays. And so that's the key, right? Is to get into a space that feels safe enough, courageous enough, and free enough to try and fail, for lack of a better word, that you can actually do something that moves you forward, that gets you unstuck. Yeah. And let's talk about stuckness for a second. I mean, for you, how would you describe being stuck as an organization? What are some elements?
Yeah, that's a great... I think I've been a part of a few spaces where that's true. For me, it feels like we have tried everything. It feels like I have done every single thing that I possibly could. And for me, also stuckness is like, I feel like I am just laser focused on the problem, and it's just me and the problem. It's just me and the problem, me and the problem. Mm-hmm. And I could just sit in that loop all day long and just not feel like I know what to do. Mm-hmm. That for me is being really stuck as a leader, especially. And knowing that when I look at the problem, in one particular case, it could be that financially our budget is not changing. We have not been able to make ends meet. Mm-hmm. And I just laser focus on that. And I do it because I know that there's a whole community behind me that I am stewarding, that I'm helping support.
Yeah. So stuckness often feels lonely.
Totally.
And so that's the connect here to this collaborative learning, right? Like you have to break through the loneliness and find the community to help.
Totally. Yes, exactly. Yes, that's a great question. I think kind of just some other things to add about this collaborative learning space is we've talked about it before. You've probably heard it, that you can't try the same things and expect different results. Mm-hmm. And so what's great about collaborative learning is that it can be a formalized process like the kind that we offer, or you can honestly do it on your own in a church. But what you do is you pull a couple of people outside of the normal rhythm of the church. And you say, we need to just take a second and we need to look at the big picture. What is happening? What is actually happening? And if you don't know, you need to find out. You need to ask the questions of your people that you're looking to understand. So, we did a listening session recently, and the pastors said to us, we want to learn about two things. One, we need to know how to train our leaders. We don't know how to do that. But the second thing is, we're doing financially okay, but we are anticipating a day that we will not be doing okay.
Sure.
And we don't know what to do about that. In that second scenario, ask your people, right? Listen to their thoughts about that first before you start to problem solve. But in order to start doing that, you have to start from a place of, it's a team. We are not alone. We're going to do this together, and we're going to pull outside of our normal rhythm we're going to take some time and we're actually going to do this work.
Yeah, and I've been a part of a couple of churches where we've had a high view of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
We've done things well. We're skeptical of outside resources. But what happens when you get stuck just being within your own system is that you miss out
Yeah.
on a lot of potential. And so a lot of church leaders will kind of roll their eyes when you start talking about consultants or coaches and they start seeing dollar signs, right?
Yeah.
They're like, what is
Yeah.
this going to cost us?
Yeah.
But going beyond the money conversation there, it's so critical to form relationships with wise people and colleagues and peers outside of your family system, your church family system,
Yeah.
to become unstuck. I mean, I think that's been a truth for every situation I've been a part of. What about you?
Yeah, no, that's totally true. And I think that's also why, so like our processes here at the RCA, we usually have content. So there's some sort of content that you take in as a team, that you process it, you take the coach, right? And so every process that I've done, there's always been someone it's possible that it's someone who's presenting the content, but they're also coming alongside at least one of the leaders from those groups to just ask the questions of like, how does this content relate to your church specifically?
Mm-hmm.
They're the person that is both kind of holding me accountable to my goals. Like, I wanted to accomplish this, we wanted to solve or fix this problem, but then I need to create the little steps to get there. Mm-hmm. And that person is like, remember, you wanted to do this little thing before you do that.
Yeah, none of this stuff is reinventing the wheel. This is like human behavioral psychology of putting accountability pieces in place,
right.
like of knowing that you have to try something and then come back and reflect on
right.
it to get it to stick. Like this is not some like new age stuff. This is simply like putting in place really good structures that help us to move forward.
Yeah.
One of the things that we offer is cultivating generous congregations, which helps churches form learning communities with other churches with facilitated, well thought out, well researched content from Lake Institute on faith and giving to have those like money, generosity, stewardship conversations. But as I started to be trained to become a faculty for this work, one of the wildest things for me is I started looking at the footnotes, and the source material was the same as the Ritter Churches Learning Change material, because it's all adaptive leadership, right? So there is intersections, no matter what program you're using these days or what facilitator or coach. We're talking about the same thing, which is this off-map adaptive leadership of going somewhere we've never gone as a church because where we are is stuck.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna define adaptive leadership, but we're not gonna do it because you happen to be married to an expert on adaptive leadership.
Yeah,
we're gonna talk to her in a second. But I want to make one point before we hear from Mara. So we noticed at the RCA that there's sort of two scenarios in which someone comes to us. One is they are in crisis. They need help immediately. And adaptive leadership processes are probably not going to help you in that particular moment,
No,
would you say?
They're so slow.
They take time. They take a lot of time. The other scenario is that people come to us when they are kind of curious about something that's happened in their context. In one situation, I had a pastor call me and say, I've been reading these articles from Barna, and they're talking about the decline of young people in the church. Are these statistics true? And I was able to say to him, yes, they are. They are very true. And we can have a process to help this change. So in that scenario, when someone's noticing that something is off, but it's not an emergent situation, that's when these sort of adaptive processes are so helpful.
Yeah. And maybe also the hardest time to ask for help. Because you feel like it's not that much of a problem.
Totally, you're not in need.
You notice it. But yeah, to take action on it, to take critical, especially when there's so many demands you have, like that's the hardest. So that's why we push so hard in our healthy churches. Honestly, we push so hard for them to become a part of these learning communities, and it's a hard sell. And sometimes we have to come back year after year and say we really encourage you to do this because now is the time.
Right.
And that's not to say that you can't intervene and make a difference when there's a crisis. Right, you can, and maybe that's the time when a leadership team is most receptive to hearing about it. But at that point, how much has the damage been done?
Yeah, right. So we're going to talk to Mara now and hear a little bit more like what is this adaptive leadership thing and why does it matter so much? Hey, Mara, thanks for joining us.
Hey, we've got the Reverend Dr. Mara Joy Cooper Norden on the call. She is a student, a practitioner, and a teacher of adaptive leadership, and a tolerant spouse of me. Thanks for being with us, Mara.
My pleasure.
So let's dive right into it. How would you describe adaptive leadership? What is it?
Well, I think of adaptive leadership as, um, I think of the Canoeing the Mountains book. And Todd Bolsinger talks about being off map in that book. And adaptive leadership is areas where the church is moving into where the church has never been before. So times when we're asking new questions, um, or needing to look at old problems in a new way. Um, and some, like, for example, that what adaptive leadership has been at play in my congregation as we have needed to change our conversation about money and how we talk about church finances, um, how we talk about the budget itself, how we talk about giving, all of that kind of stuff. So this is a new thing for the church as the financial landscape has changed with COVID, as generations and how they give and what they want to give to is changing. And so adaptive work is things that you can't necessarily get from an expert. Like there's no prescribed program uh, to help your church talk about money in a new way. But there's parts of that are what I think about as operational leadership, like learning how to actually like read a line item budget. Like that's operational. There's someone out there who can teach me that. There's someone out there who's an expert in that. But the culture around money, and changing the conversation about money, that is an adaptive task.
So what have you noticed is different when you implement an adaptive task versus an operational task?
It usually involves the first couple steps are um, realizing how much we don't know. And then getting into that uncomfortable territory um, realizing that we have no idea what we're doing, um, and we don't know how to move forward. And I think that's often that place of feeling stuck, of knowing like, oh gosh, our how we're doing our budget, how we're talking about money, this isn't working anymore. Feeling stuck like that is a kind of a scary place to be from a leadership perspective, and not knowing what to do next, not having hope that things are going to change and be better, not seeing a way forward. Um, but I've learned to see those stuck times as the moment when things begin to shift, um, where you realize you don't have the resources um, within within the leadership body to solve the problem is also the moment when you start to realize that you need to do something different. And that's where adaptive leadership gets exciting um, is moving into uncharted territory and following the movement of the spirit.
So we've talked a little bit about that moment, right, of feeling stuck, and we're going to come back to maybe how you've felt like you're starting to become unstuck. But I think in the middle, knowing a little bit of your story, you were able to explore what adaptive leadership is like with some other leaders within your congregation, but also you broaden that circle to leaders from other congregations and some mentors along the way. So say a little bit about how collaboration plays into adaptive leadership.
Yeah, so one of the things I've noticed in a lot of communities is that when we get stuck, um, we tend to get scared. And that's a time when communities are tempted to kind of circle the wagons And we're not going to let anybody know that we don't have it all together. In some communities, there's a sense of competition between different congregations, or a need to put forth this view that, we have it all together. Um, what I've learned in the adaptive leadership work is the absolute necessity of opening up the circle of wagons and reaching out for wisdom beyond ourselves, beyond what we know to be true right now. And some of the most powerful learning, and not just learning, but forward movements, have come from engaging in a learning community and learning alongside other churches who are also taking the courageous step of trying to change their culture around something. Um, and engaging a coach has also been very transformational. And it's not that in adaptive work, it's not that the coach brings in this fantastic program. There's a book written about it, or there's a workbook or a program where that you just sort of lay on top of what's happening in your place. But a coach can help you dive deeper into your own culture, into the resources that you have as with the Holy Spirit, to be able to ask new questions that you wouldn't have had maybe the courage to ask before, um, and to open up possibilities, not in the way of using their expertise, but in the way of applying wisdom and best practices to help you learn deeply from your own place of being.
With the hope for outcome of getting unstuck, figuring out what territory you're going into. And so I'm so curious, where have you experienced the practice of adaptive leadership starting to give you glimpses of becoming unstuck? I assume you're not all the way unstuck in every area, but where have you seen the glimpses or the hope by implementing adaptive leadership?
Um, what comes to mind first um, is coming to realize, is figuring out how to talk to one another about things. So, um, for example, we had a very interesting conversation. This is switching from the finances of the congregation to, we were talking about how we were going to use our church building for something. And we were kind of talking around each other, and there was conflict in the room about how we were going to use our church building, whether or not we were going to use allow alcohol use in the building. And there was some conflict, and it came to be that moment in tending to the conversation within myself where I realized we're talking about different things here. We have different mental models, is what I want to get to. We have different mental models about what a church sanctuary is for. And some people were coming at it from the assumption that the church sanctuary is a holy place that should be set apart and different from the rest of our life. And so we shouldn't allow those kinds of things like alcohol in our church building because it should be set apart. And there were other people who were coming to this conversation with a mental model about our church building and our church sanctuary as being an asset that we could offer to our community. And once we were able to uncover the different mental models that people were coming with, then we could start to think about, what do we want our mental model of our church building to actually be? And that helped us make a decision about that everybody could understand. And even if people didn't 100% sign on to it, they understood the reasons for it, and they understood the values that were behind it. And that's the kind of adaptive leadership that gets us moving from the way things have always been into how do we embrace a new reality that God is calling us into.
That's so helpful. It's venturing into uncharted territory, but it's also realizing what you're bringing with you into that uncharted
Yeah.
territory. So, what would you leave our audience with as far as adaptive leadership? I mean, I'm assuming you would claim that it's not optional, right, for thriving churches. So, what words could you give in closing?
I would encourage everyone to find the courage to be uncomfortable as a leader. Um, I have needed to learn um, to say I don't know. I have needed to learn um, how to not be the expert in the room. Um, and that's really vulnerable and really uncomfortable. Um, and as I said earlier, that's when possibilities start to open up. So the question I would have for leaders is, how do you grow that capacity um, to sit in that discomfort and invite your other leaders to sit in that discomfort with you? Um, and frankly, it's easier to go into that discomfort if you have someone to sort of accompany you there, like a coach, someone to talk to about what it's like to be in that uncomfortable state. And it's in that discomfort that the change can start to happen.
Mara, thank you so much for your wisdom and also sharing the experience to show what it's been like to be on the journey. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So we just heard from Mara about adaptive leadership, right? What that means, how the landscape is changing, and it has always been changing, and it's the job of the church to listen, right?
Yeah.
Listen and watch for what God is doing. And I think that's really the key, is this is all contextualized
Yeah.
for our churches and our people. So, I mean, if you think about the different churches that you've worked with, you have the privilege, right, of working with churches all over the US, maybe even beyond the US, and you get to see the different things they're doing in the different neighborhoods that they live in. What do you notice about how they discern the unique thing that God is calling them to be or do in their community?
Yeah. I think there are two critical pieces. One is being willing to commit to the process, even when you feel like you already know. We have had a number of churches who have, and I feel this even as a human, like just as a person, when I see or experience content where I'm like, I already know this, I write it off. And the problem with that is you're not respecting the collaborative. And whenever you're in a collaborative process, there are people that are all around the circle that are experiencing the content in a different way. And we forget that. So when we do a process together, it feels very much like, oh, I already know how to do this, I'm all set. It doesn't create that space for the Holy Spirit transformation. That's kind of the first thing, is just when you're going through a learning process collaboratively, it's critical to see it through. Mm-hmm. Because you don't know what the Holy Spirit is going to bring forward before you. The second thing is context is critical. And for learning processes, we say content because content is going to be presented to you. That content is designed to make you think, and it's designed to make your community talk. And those two things are not going to result in for your context. You have to do the hard work. That's where the gymnastics happens, where you start to say, here's the playground, here's the structure. Now we get to decide the game that we're going to play on the playground. And so for churches that are used to just picking up a plug and play curriculum for children, for example, that doesn't always work.
It's systems, right? It's the quick fix. We've got this model, let's just do that.
Right.
And the quick fix is rarely the thing.
Right, exactly. There isn't going to be a silver bullet to the thing or the question that you're trying to solve, especially when it comes to relationships and systems and people. And so I think that context, we talk about that a lot with coaching, is that the coach really comes alongside the team to start asking those curious questions. How does this fit in your context? How do you define mission? How do you see your neighbors? Who are your neighbors? How do you engage with your neighbors? Those questions are not, the other question I should just say is, have you talked to your neighbor? Do you know what your neighbor thinks of you?
Yeah.
That is a level of intimacy and vulnerability that I don't think we often get to because we're so busy doing the maintenance of church. And that's where the collaborative process is really helpful too, because you have people who have a stake in the work enough so that when you as the leader start to kind of shift the behavior that you are being called toward to lean into that change, they can kind of be the stakes in the ground to say, nope, this is okay. What pastor's doing is what we believe we're called to do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the other critical piece is just when you select teams to do collaborative learning with, you have to be mindful of who you're selecting and why you're selecting them.
Yeah, who's sitting on the bus. It's so crucial, and churches are so bad at that because we often want to sort of leave it up to a very like loosely democratic process of just kind of, and it almost like we put people in these groups out of our anxiety rather than giftedness.
Yeah, right.
And it's a train wreck usually.
Yeah, and being able to evaluate the landscape of your faith community as all of these people have gifts.
Mm-hmm.
They're all talented. And there's a very selective group that we need to have for this process. There's a very certain giftedness that we need to have by way of discernment here. And it might not be the people that we've had in leadership year after year. It might be some new people, and that will be hard.
Yeah.
So generous congregations is something that you offer as a way of learning. And we know that there's a number of congregations that are curious about how to talk through finances, how to talk about ways of being thoughtful and creative around their finances. I think that's a great resource to end on. Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, it's a really good opportunity. Again, it's a commitment. You need to gather a team. The senior pastor has to be involved in this particular workshop. We're going to try it all virtual this winter. We know that there's so much value and joy in doing something in person, but we also have seen that, especially with good lay leadership teams, we have to have that flexibility to be able to bring people in across the country and gather. So we're going to try it midwinter online. You'll get more emails from the RCA and from the Board of Benefit Services about that. But it's really beyond money, right? It's about adaptive leadership to say, here's a place where most churches are stuck. Here's a thing that we're not good at talking about. And it's beyond church, right?
Right.
Just as Americans, we kind of hold our money conversation close to the chest. But it's a way of saying there's a more faithful way to talk about money. It's a way to engage more deeply in our Bible. It's a way to motivate your congregation around its mission and to be able to invest tangible dollars in that mission. And it makes money, it takes it from being this really like uncomfortable thing to a really like exciting thing that is full of celebration and possibility.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. I'm excited. I'm ready to join you.
Yes.
Cheers to Jumpstart.
Cheers to Jumpstart.
Woo!